What's up, Ionics, and welcome back to a new quick win. Today is basically the second part of a tutorial that we started last week, but it's actually also a tutorial on its own because I didn't want to have any dependencies between them. Last week we talked about caching your API responses using Capacitor or Ionic storage, and today we're talking about caching files because that is a bit different, and we will implement a simple component so we can basically replace just the image tags that we used in our application, and in the background the component does all the hard work like downloading the file, saving the file, or retrieving the file in case we need it. If you want to access the full quick win, make sure you check out the link below and become a member of the Ionic Academy if you're not yet, so go check it out, ionicacademy.com, or simply click the link below the video. And now let's dive into our image caching component with Ionic and Capacitor. Alright, so let's get started with today's application. We're gonna start with a blank template. We're not using the code from the previous tutorial about API caching, but I'm sure you can easily combine those two approaches. The only thing we need today is a module for components and a new component that we want to build out. Once you got that in place, you can head over to the app module. Since we're making HTTP requests, we need to inject the HTTP client module and import it into our app module. And with that in place, we can head over to the homepage, HTML and TS, and implement the basic, let's say, dump functionality or the default functionality, how it usually looks in your application. So you might have some products, some kind of array, and you're making an HTTP request to this fake store API, which returns some images, and we want to cache those images. We're gonna just assign it to our products, and we're gonna call this the load products right in the beginning. So let's first of all take a look how this in general looks. Okay, maybe we should also implement a little view. That could really help. So let's put into a button and ion card ng4 let p of products, and then we can go ahead. Let's just put in an image. We're gonna use the product image as source. Maybe gonna add a little bit of ion padding because always good if it doesn't look too crappy. Now ion card content, and let's bring into the content a bit of information from the JSON, just so we see something on the screen with the title and the price. Okay, we got our API. Now how can we verify what we're actually doing? We can first of all go to the network tab and let's clear everything, and we can also activate image. And let's hit load products, and what we see, we're loading these, I think, 20 product images. Now let's remove this, load the products again, and once again we're loading them. So if each of them has about a size of 50, 20, we're already at 1 megabyte if I calculate this right, and these are pretty small images. Now, how can we improve that behavior? Of course, here it is pretty fast, but if we enable some kind of throttling, then, of course, the HTTP request will be slow, but loading the images is really painful, and on devices with a slow connection, this can really take a lot of time now. As we can see, some images are coming in, but they really take a long time. So let's move back to no throttling for now, and let's see how we can improve that. And we can do this with our custom component. For the setup, make sure your custom component is declared, and most importantly, most importantly, also inside the exports array. Because only if it's in the exports array, we can head over to our page and import the shared components module, and that's what we need to do. All right, now we can head over to the logic for our component. So in general, the logic is actually pretty easy. Let's start by defining a little cache folder up here. Usually you could also have this inside a service, but I didn't want to bring up another file for this tutorial, so we're just inside doing it inside our custom component. That will work as well. Now we will have a source variable in here, which we will set to an empty string in the beginning. And because we're doing this, we can also take a quick look at our implementation for the HTML. So basically the only thing we want to display in here is an image. And we want to use for the image source our underscore source. Now, we only want to display this if our source is actually unequal to an empty string. And in the else case, we want to display a little loading indicator. Now, we can define this by using ng template. Oh, that was interesting. But I don't need anything, and we got one bracket too much, so it was maybe a bit more work. Now, this is how you do it. If you're using an ng if else, you can define an ng template for the loading. You could also have ng if source, whatever in here without else, so different ways using the same. And then we're gonna put in, maybe just for now, an ion spinner. We can also customize this later. If you now see a red line under this, it's most likely because you haven't added the Ionic module. I already did this up front. So make sure your shared component also imports the Ionic module, since you're using an Ionic component in there. And now we can go back to our logic and define an input, but we don't want to just define an input for the source element, because then we are already setting the source. You can already imagine that we're likely changing the image to something like app image and then putting in the source to our image. So something like this. That's not correctly right now, but something like this. And if we just take the source input and display it, we're gonna have basically the same logic like we had before. So instead, we're gonna define directly a setter function for source, which basically gets the source. We will call this image URL. And that means our cached image, maybe we can even use it already, because then you can see it in action. The selector is the name for our component. So let's use cached image and putting in the source. And within here, we should now get a log set source to our image URL. And let's see if this changes something. Hopefully it does. Cached image is not a known element. Well, that sounds great. We added it to the home module. We gave it the name cached image. We're using it with cached image. So most likely the only thing that's messed up is our live reload. Can't bind to source since it's not a known property of cached image. Well, this is completely incorrect. But what can you do? The best thing you can do is actually to restart your serve command, which I have somewhere in my command line. Strange, I usually do it in here. So let's do Ionic serve again and then hope it works. Now, in the meantime, if you also want to specify more custom options, there was a package in the past that I used that had a lot of options, like use the image as background image or as a real image. You could do all of this. The only thing I wanted to show you is like having a difference for the input spinner. I will set this to false, and then within our HTML, we're gonna see this in action. Okay, do we now get the logs? Yeah, we're gonna see the logs. Let's talk about this in a second and finish that first thought. So you could define a lot of different things for your cached image component. I just added this little spinner, and once you've done this, you could just do something like this. If you want to show a spinner, just show the spinner. And if you don't want to show a spinner, show maybe an ion skeleton text or something else. So you could have a little bit of options for your cached component. Now, as we've seen, we get the call for set source and we're displaying this skeleton text right now. We could now easily change this within our home page HTML. If we want to say, please use the spinner, we're going to set this to true. And instead of the skeleton text, our component would now display a spinner. Oh, that works once again really great. Maybe we should save the component. And then we see we got a spinner instead. So that is a way to customize your component. But I actually preferred to have our little skeleton here. All right, we got the source. Now, what's coming up? From the source, we need to check if we have the image already downloaded, then we just need to grab the file URL and display it, or we need to download it and then grab the file URL and display it. This is basically the whole flow. And to achieve this, we're gonna start with something to grab the information from the image. To now store the image, we need two things. We need the image name, so we can save it somehow, and we also need the file type to create a base64 string. You will see why this is necessary in a second. But before we do this, we're gonna copy over this. I had stored this, so we need the plugins from Capacitor core and the file system directory. This is still using Capacitor 2. If you're already using Capacitor 3, you might have to install the file system from a different package. I actually don't know if that's still in the core or a different package, so maybe a little change for Capacitor 3. And then we can start our journey by saying file system, please read the following file. And we're gonna say look inside a directory, and for this we're gonna use our file system directory cache. You could also store it in data documents, wherever you want, but I thought, well, it is caching a file, so maybe the cache folder would be a good place. And then we also need a path. Those are the two required values, and this one will be our cache folder slash image name. Of course, if your images have the same name, well, then you should maybe add something like a random string to the image name, but for now we're gonna keep it like this. Now, this will try to read the file. There is currently, as far as I know, no functionality to check if a file exists. Usually we would first of all check if the file exists, but there's no option. And because that's the case, we have to do this inside our catch block. We're gonna reach the catch block if the file doesn't exist. So that means we need to write the file to our file system at this point. And we can easily do this. But for now, let's continue in the first part, because here we already got a file. We're gonna get local file. We're gonna lock this out once we're able to get this, but of course, first we need to load it. So set to source at this point. To write the file, we now need to implement a little logic. I found this inside the Capacitor, inside the Ionic forum actually, inside the community, and I will put in the link as well. I think Matt posted this. Well, let's check it quickly out if it was Matt. So who gets credits for this function? Yeah, the good old netcow. We're gonna store an image from the URL, because if we look at the API response that we get and that you usually get from your API, you're gonna have for the image something like this. If you already get a base64 string or a blob, saving might be different, but let's say you from your API also get back a string like this. That means you need to download the file from that place first of all, and that's what our store image functionality does. We can easily use the fetch API. You could also do this with the Angular HTTP client. For the fetch API, I had to add my little proxy in front of the URL, because for the images there was actually no CORS implemented, and then we get into problems. So maybe you're gonna have to use a proxy for your own as well. Once you get the response, you can convert it to a blob. And once you've converted it to a blob, you need one more step, which was also mentioned by Matt, is convert blob to base64. The reason is simply, if you want to write the file to the Capacitor file system, you need to pass in a string for the data. And therefore, we just need to add the base64 data here. We're going to use the cache folder once again, and the path will be very likely our image name. and the directory should be the same you use in all the other places. So make sure you're really using that all over the place. And this just converts our function using the file reader from blob to base64. Okay, with the store image in place, we can head over back here, once again, back to our log where we want to write the file. So let's await our function, this dot store image. The URL to the image should be our image URL. That's where we want to download the image from. And then we got the image name in the second place. Okay, now we have stored the file, and that means we can now read it, because the write function actually doesn't only returns a file URI. That's not really helpful. At this point, we can now once again read the file from the cache directory, same path like before. And then we're most likely in callback hell with a lot of then in here. No, it's fine. I think it's okay. You could maybe do this with observables somehow as well, but it will work like this, trust me. And at this point, we're at the same place like we are here. And now the only thing we need to do is set our source. And we can do this by just saying data image, whatever our file type was, base64, and the data that we've written from the file. And same goes into the then block here. It's just one additional step to store the image, which performs a lot of interesting things in the background, and then we can store it. Okay, we got this in place. There was a little problem for using this code on a device, and that was that the parent folder didn't exist. So our cool cache folder didn't exist initially. If you had a service, I would recommend to put in some kind of init logic like we had in the previous tutorial about API caching. For now, what we're gonna do is we will just head over to our app component, inject this, and then create a function like this to create our cache folder right in the beginning. So this will make a directory at our place using cached img, and then we got this set up in the beginning. Now, if we save everything and head back to our application, we now should see something interesting. Okay, we got a log for set source, and as we can see, suddenly they are images once again. Now, how did this magic work? If you go to the application and then we add some logs, I'm a bit confused. I got a local file. Yeah, I didn't set a log here because we reached the catch block, we stored the image, we read it, and then set it to our source. But we can verify this by going to application file storage, and if it looks empty, don't panic, just click refresh. And we see we got the folder up here which was created, and then we got all the files, content, whatever interesting information. And what happens next is that if we now press load products, they will basically be immediately here. We get set source and we see local file with the base64 data in here. And how did the spinner get there? I really don't know. Where is this spinner? Interesting. We can now check also our network tab, and let's clear this and let's load the products. And we see no calls are happening anymore. Well, to really verify this in the end, you could also easily create a function to clear the cache, which we also had in the past tutorials. I will just quickly add this to our homepage only for testing. This will get the directory for our cached images. Once again, having a const and exporting it somewhere might be a better idea than to just have this string all over the place in your application. And then it will iterate all the files, and for each of the files call delete file. To call that, let's add a quick button to our home page up here to clear the cache. And maybe we're gonna set also our products to an empty array afterwards. And once we got that, let's finally check it out. So we're loading the data and we already see everything's coming from the memory cache. If I do it again, same behavior. Now let's clear all of this and let's load it again. And we're doing all the funny requests again. I don't know why you say memory cache, because not sure about that. Shouldn't be the case. Let me quickly check. You didn't remove everything, my friend. Clear cache. Clear cache, why didn't you remove my files? Delete. Or I guess we already downloaded them once again, right? Set source, network tab. Maybe they don't appear there because we are downloading them now. If I do it again, it should definitely look different. Yeah, we're just making a call to products, as we can see. And all of our files are now once again inside the file storage. So we can manage this. You could also add more information to a different place, like the time to live for file images. But right now, we could now easily throttle our network to something like slow. Then load the products. Of course, the call to the API in general will be slow, but those 4 kilobytes will still be fine enough. And we immediately got all the images. Remember in the beginning when we didn't have the images, or if we close this and now do it again, downloading all those images is really painful for users with a slow connection. It takes about like 10-20 seconds, really depends on the connection. But we also got that covered with our skeleton in the background, which is replaced once we've downloaded the file and once we can read the file from our file system. And now we got everything. I think we got everything. We could clear this again, load the products. We're still slow, but now we're only loading products and immediately got the list. So that's our image caching with a super simple component that I hope you can integrate quickly into your own applications. Alright, and that's it for today. That was the second part. I hope you now understand basically everything about how you can implement your own caching mechanism, from caching JSON strings inside Ionic storage to caching image files using the file system. We haven't seen this approach on a device, but trust me, I've tried it. The only thing that we had to do was create this parent folder for the image cache component, for the image cached files upfront, but that was basically the only custom change that I had to do in this code to make it work on a real device. Give it a try, combine it with the previous tutorial, use the service to export the cons so you don't have them all over the place in your applications, and then I really hope that those 2 components and tutorials help you to implement your own simple caching, which actually isn't too hard to do in your application, so your users benefit from local available data. Once again, if you're not yet a member, go check it out, ionicacademy.com, my place to help you with everything Ionic. If you enjoyed the video, of course, also give it a like and hit the subscribe button so you get notified about all the upcoming videos about Ionic and the other topics, well, mostly Ionic. Anyway, have a great week and enjoy the code, and happy coding, Simon.